Loos, welcome to this Loose Tales special report on September the 8th, 2021. William Perry Pendley. You mind if I start you off with a trivia question instead of introducing you proper?
Yeah, I hate to embarrass myself, but sure, Trent, go ahead.
Well, actually, I'm pretty sure you're going to get this one right. What happened on this day in 1900 that was climate change powered?
Sounds like the Galveston flood.
Yeah. The Galveston hurricane flood killed 6,000 people on this day in
Absolutely.
1900.
It's one of the greatest natural disasters to hit the country. It's right up there with the Johnstown flood that wiped out Johnstown, Pennsylvania.
Yeah. When I go read about that Johnstown flood in PA, oh my goodness, it's just unimaginable. And I just got off another conversation with a friend of mine in New Jersey. They had 10 inches there this weekend. Wow. Imagine if that had happened back in the day before we had the ability to manage resources like we do today.
Oh, absolutely. And for decades after the Johnstown flood, people would knock on back doors of houses begging for food and say, ma'am, I survived the Johnstown flood. Could you help me out?
Speaking of managing resources, that is exactly what your job was for a period of time. I might mention not long enough, William Perry Pendley, former deputy director for the Bureau of Land Management. And how do you summarize that time spent trying to bring some degree of actual management to the Bureau of Land Management?
Order to chaos. I ran the Bureau of Land Management for President Trump. From about July of 2019, when we were energy independent for the first time since 1957, until we left office and handed it over to Joe Biden to mess up and make us dependent on foreign sources of energy. But the president was committed to being a good neighbor to the American West. I served for Ronald Reagan back in the 1980s, 1981 period. And he wanted to be a good neighbor for the West because of Jimmy Carter's war in the West. And then we had Clinton and we had Obama come in and reignite the war on the West. And Trump came in and returned to where we were with Ronald Reagan, developing energy, being a good neighbor, and recognizing that although we Westerners love the public lands, we got to have a life out here. We got to have a living. And whether it's logging or mining or oil and gas or recreation or cattle grazing, we got to live out here. And Trump recognized that. God bless him for it. He did a great job. He was the best president for the American West since Ronald Reagan. And I was proud to be with him.
I want to go back to something that you said that I think is the best kept secret in America today. July 2019. We became energy independent. In fact, we started shipping some oil to other countries. That just got swept under the rug, and now we've crippled our oil infrastructure to put us in peril.
Well, we absolutely have. Look, Trent, I'm a Marine. I've got an active duty Marine son who's right now in the Pacific. And if we ever sent our kids to war to protect our energy supplies or made decisions about foreign policy based upon our need for oil, President Trump made sure we didn't have to do that no more. We didn't have to think, oh, geez, what'll the Saudis say? Oh, what'll Venezuela say? Oh, what'll Iran say? We'd say, to heck with them. We got plenty of energy here in the United States. We can make decisions that serve America first and foremost.
Let me qualify something that you said, because my friends in North Dakota listening to this are going to respond. So I just want to put that into qualify that, so to speak.
Up there in the Bakken.
In the Bakken. We were moving, William. We were moving to a direction of being oil independent, and Trump didn't make it happen, but he got out of the way so it could happen. Don't you think that's a fair statement?
Oh, that's a fair statement. And, we started, the thing that did it was fracking. Fracking is not a controversial technology. It's a tried and true technology. It's been in place since 1947. And fracking was the thing that really uncovered it. The Bakken, that was frack central, frankly. But it went all across the country from Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Missouri, up into Pennsylvania to the Marcellus and Ohio with the Utica. but it was Trent. It was primarily on private and state lands. Because of Obama, we Westerners were cut out of the deal. So you look at the boom going on in North Dakota. You look across the border in Montana, where you got a lot of public lands, not so much. And so Trump said, we're going to develop public lands. We had the largest Bureau of Land Management oil and gas leasing sale in the history of the Bureau of Land Management in New Mexico. And half of that money goes back to the state. A third of the money for education in the state of New Mexico comes from the oil patch. As the former congressman, Democratic congressman from down there said, you stop fracking today, we close the schools tomorrow.
Right.
That's the nature of the relationship.
It comes back to just managing the resources that we have. And I found it ironic that you contacted me last week that led to this discussion. And it was the day after I was in Yellowstone National Park. And I want to be clear that the Forest Service is part of the USDA. The BLM manages under the Department of Interior. And I just want nobody to get confused with those semantics. But I was in Yellowstone. And William, I had to stop and do a little 2.5-minute video because the number of huge trees that had fallen and just laying there in Yellowstone National Park, it just drove me to my wit's end, because I know what's going to happen. You know what's going to happen. At some point in time, there's going to be a spark. There's going to be a fire start. And because we didn't harvest those trees properly, and this is just one little case, you cannot drive from Cheyenne, Wyoming to LA without seeing a smoke-induced atmosphere every step of the way. And mostly that's because we haven't managed our own resources properly. How do we get back to that?
Well, that's absolutely the case. Trees, these radical environmentalists, they have no understanding of nature, and they think trees last forever. And also they think American Indians that we Europeans greeted when we came across the country were, they left the forest alone. They didn't. They used fire. There is natural fire, and then the American Indians used fire because, if you try to go into some of these woods, you can't walk because of all the undergrowth and so forth. Well, if you can't get in there, the elk can't get in there, and the deer neither. And so you got to clear it out, and it's got to be harvested. It's like a crop, for loggers, every day is Earth Day. And of course, the Park Service is a different kettle of fish, but 80% of these fires are caused by humans. And it's not climate change. It's simply we have a lot of undergrowth. We have a lot of timber that hasn't been harvested. With the Forest Service, it's mostly the timber. With the BLM, Bureau of Land Management, it's the prairie, it's the pinyon juniper that hasn't been cleared out. And that's what President Trump set out to do. And you remember last September, he flew out to see, former Governor Newsom in California. He sat down with the governor. He said, Governor, you got to start cutting more trees. You got to clear out this all of this hazardous fuels that we got, or else it's going to burn up. And Newsom didn't listen to him. He's still pressing on. But that's the major problem. We're having these fires because there's so much fuel buildup, and people going out and being careless too.
So the one thing that I'm very much admire in the Trump administration was the people that are hands-on, such as yourself, such as my friend Greg Dowd that I was there yesterday at his place in Annapolis, Maryland, who was the ag negotiator for USTR. Just up and down the line, there are people throughout the USDA, and every appointment were people that were hands-on. I believe you and I share a concern that we have an appointment coming up, depending on Senate confirmation, of one of those eco-extremists that you were just talking about, that potentially is going to be in charge of this mismanagement if we're not careful.
Oh, absolutely. President Biden, of course, he's really going the wrong way on energy and jobs. And, I was a union man back in my youth. I worked for the Union Pacific Railroad. My dad was a lifelong union man. So I know all about union jobs. And President Biden is killing union jobs. And now he's nominated to run the Bureau of Land Management. And let me, your listeners are primarily Westerners and rural folk, and so they know the Bureau of Land Management. And they know that it manages 245 million acres of land. It manages another 700 million acres of subsurface on Forest Service lands and elsewhere. That's a tenth of the country. It's primarily in the Mountain West and Alaska. And so it's a huge determiner of the future of Western states and mountain states. And so he's nominated to run the Bureau of Land Management. A woman out of Montana, formerly from Virginia, named Tracy Stone Manning. And you can only describe her as an unrepentant eco-terrorist. She was a member of the radical, and I mean, to say radical is to understate the case. They were a domestic terror organization that was targeted by the FBI. It was the primary source of domestic terrorism, an organization called Earth First. And she was a leader of that organization. She wrote its newsletter out of Missoula, Montana. And she was an accessory before the fact, an accessory after the fact, and an aider and abettor of a tree spiking incident in the Clearwater National Forest in Montana. And she should have gone to jail for her crimes. She got an immunity deal to testify against the prime mover, but she's never apologized for what she did, and she's never fully disclosed her activities and apologized for it. So she should not be the director of the Bureau of Land Management. And Trent, that's not just me saying that. Obama's director of the Bureau of Land Management, a fellow by the name of Bob Abbey, said she shouldn't be confirmed. Steve Ellis, who was with the Bureau of Land Management under Obama, he said she shouldn't be confirmed. You got to work with the 10,000 employees. You got to work with red states and blue states, and she doesn't belong in that chair.
Yeah, and I just want to put around italics around something that you said. You called Earth First a domestic terrorist group. And that's not you saying that. The FBI labeled them as the most dangerous, along with Animal Liberation Front, the most dangerous group in terms of domestic terrorism in the United States. So it was the FBI, and now she's up for a government appointment in a very significant position in a cabinet.
Absolutely. Here's what happened. If I can go a little bit into the weeds on this, but here's what happened. She's a 23-year-old graduate student at the University of Montana in Missoula. She's living in a house with 7 other similarly opinioned folks, all members of Earth First. And along about February 1989. They say, hey, why don't we go over to Clearwater National Forest? It's about 40 miles west of Missoula, and let's spike a timber sale over there. And when I say spike, they got these 8 or 10-inch bridge construction spikes, big, heavy-duty spikes. And they went over and they drove spikes into these trees. That was the plan. And Tracy was part of it. Tracy Stone Manning was part of the planning from the beginning. And this guy by the name of John P. Blount, he was the guy, he and a buddy were going to go over and do it. But Tracy was part of it from the beginning. And she said, oh, yeah, and I'll mail the letter. Because, of course, what they wanted to do was put the Forest Service on notice so the Forest Service would know that the the sale had been sabotaged and go over and cancel the sale. So she was supposed to mail the letter. And in fact, she said, well, I'll mail it. I'll drive down to Billings. That's about a 4-hour drive. I'll drive down to Billings and mail it there. Well, she didn't. She retyped it because her fingerprints were on it. She didn't want it on her computer. She rented a typewriter. She sent it. Well, of course, heads exploded over at the Forest Service. They got an investigator on it, and they essentially raided the house she was in. They subpoenaed everybody. They say, we want fingerprints, we want handwriting samples, we want hair samples. And she said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to cooperate. And they said, okay, lady, you're going to go to jail. And So finally she said, okay, I'll cooperate. So she provided the samples, but then she clammed up. She wouldn't talk, and she refused. And so she lied to a special agent with the U.S. Forest Service. She lied to an assistant U.S. attorney, and she lied to the grand jury because in 1989 the grand jury met, and she said, I don't know anything. And so fast forward, so at the end of 1989, the assistant U.S. attorney says, we have no idea who did this. 3 years later, they got a call from a former girlfriend of this guy Blount, who was terrified of him. Apparently, he'd knocked her around a bit. And she said, I want him to stay in jail. And so she said he was the guy that did the tree spiking. And oh, by the way, his girl, this gal who was his roommate, Tracy Stone Manning, she mailed the letter. She can corroborate what I told you. So they contact Stone Manning. She lawyers up. She gets an immunity deal, and she testifies against Blount. But she says, "Oh, I did the right thing. I testified against him." She didn't. She lied about the whole thing, and the only reason why they ever caught him was his former girlfriend came in and said, "Yeah, he's the dude. He's the one who did it." And then Tracy Stone Manning got an immunity deal to testify against him. And so for 32 years, she has lied about what happened there. And she doesn't belong into the director's chair.
So at the end of the day, and I want to be clear again, that of the 1/3, 1 in every 3 acres that the United States government or the federal government or the state government owns, not all of them are under the direction of the Bureau of Land Management, but a huge chunk of them are.
Oh, yeah.
This is not the type. We need to get back to managing these, William. And kind of in closing, what is your vision for the future of management? Because now, beyond just the 33% and another 12% that's in the conservation easement, that on January 27th, Biden signs an executive order to manage another 30% of deeded property in his initiative called 30 by 30.
Right.
How do we bring all of this into check and get individuals in private property managing the resources correctly instead of this government chaos that we have?
Well, the Republicans, frankly, are going to have to wake up. Frankly, I'm Trent. I don't know about you, but I'm tired of these Republicans telling me and telling all of us all the bad things Biden are doing. We know all the bad things Biden are doing. We're out here suffering from it. Republicans have to take charge. American people have to take charge and say this is wrong. Having our economies here in the West shut down because of Biden's dreamy worldview. I mean, you heard him talking yesterday in which he said, well, why we want to be carbon free or neutral free, whatever it is, by 2020. Hey, dude, 2020 was last year. So he's not keeping up on current events.
And I have to correct you. I didn't hear him say anything yesterday. I don't listen. When his mouth's moving, I don't listen. Go ahead.
Exactly. But the first thing we got to do is the Senate, when it comes in next week, it has to stop Tracy Stone Manning. The Senate is split 50-50 on her. The Republicans, for the first time with a nominee, have lined up against her. And so we need one of these Democrats in Nevada or Arizona or New Hampshire or West Virginia to get smart and say, this person has no business, because she's anti-logging. She's anti-grazing. Her organization was cow-free by 93 back in the 90s, and we're sabotaging cattle operations. She thinks houses ought to burn down in the West because they were built in the wrong place. She endorsed a statement by her husband in that regard. And she has 300 law enforcement officers working for her. And she lied to a law enforcement officer a few years ago, and she's never repented of it. I just don't know how law enforcement people can work with her, given it as how she has such a low regard for the rule of law and for law enforcement. And plus, these BLM rangers that we have out west, they're responsible for 1 million acres apiece. They obviously can't do that without the cooperation of our Western sheriffs. And our the Western States Sheriff's Association has come out against Stone Manning as well. So the Senate needs to reject that nomination and allow Biden to put somebody who's at least won't lie to grand juries in charge.
And I cannot echo those sentiments any louder. We take the country back one county at a time. If we sit back and expect anybody in Washington, D.C. to implement the we the people theory, we'll be sadly disappointed. Thank you,
Amen.
William Perry Pendley. I appreciate your time. Thank you for your service as a Marine. Thank your son for that as well.
Will do.
I appreciate you speaking up, getting the truth presented to the people. Clear logic thinking needs to take over, folks. Loose tales, special report. Be gentle.